2 million years ago, the world was already old, yet the story of humanity was only beginning, fragile, uncertain, a flicker in the long night of prehistory. Our kind was never guaranteed. In truth, we should not be here at all. Across endless ages, extinction pressed in from every side: famine, predators, ice, and fire. Again and again, the odds were stacked against us, and yet, somehow, we survived. Hello there, and welcome to BoneAge. My name is Thomas. Tonight, we'll drift into the shadows of deep time, into the precarious journey of our ancestors, who clung to existence when every sign suggested they would vanish. This is not a tale of triumph, but of improbable survival, a 2 million-year struggle against annihilation. Imagine standing in Africa 2 million years ago. The land is wide and raw, the air dry with dust. Herds of strange beasts graze on open plains: giant elephants, saber-tooths watching from the tall grass, hyenas the size of lions. And among them, a few scattered bands of early humans, numbering perhaps only thousands across an entire continent. Small, fragile, prey more often than predator. They carried no claws, no fangs, no armor. Just clever hands, sharp eyes, and the will to endure. But endurance was never easy. Climate shifted without mercy. Forests gave way to barren savannas. Rain fell one season and vanished the next. Hunger was a constant companion, and predators circled the firelight at night. Even later, when modern humans emerged, our numbers teetered on the brink. Genetic evidence reveals bottlenecks, where we dwindled to fewer than 2,000 breeding individuals. One drought, one volcanic eruption, one unlucky turn could have erased us forever. And yet, in those darkest moments, chance intervened. Somewhere, a small group found a refuge by a river, or learned to tame fire, or held together through the cold when others fell apart. These were not victories in the way we imagine them. They were acts of holding on, of refusing to disappear. What if every breath you take carries the echo of that fragile persistence? What if your existence is the improbable inheritance of survivors who should never have made it through the storm? Tonight, we explore the 2 million-year battle against extinction, the narrow escapes, the frozen nights, the ash-darkened skies. We won't be rushing toward answers. Instead, we'll move slowly, through silence and shadow, asking again and again, were we destined to survive, or was it only luck? And to begin, we must step into the precarious beginning. 2 million years ago, Africa was a continent of restless change. The land rolled with vast savannas broken by scattered woodlands, and rivers cut through valleys that were alive with animal herds, elephants far larger than today's, antelopes bounding across the horizon, and predators waiting just beyond sight. And within this shifting world, a fragile figure walked the line between existence and oblivion: the early hominin. They were not many. Scattered in small bands, numbering perhaps only a few tens of thousands across an entire continent, they were less than a ripple in the vast sea of life. Some nights, their fires, if they had fire at all, flickered like faint stars under the immensity of the African sky. They were always vulnerable, always at risk of disappearing into silence. Imagine crouching with them at dusk. The air cools quickly after the sun sinks, and shadows lengthen across the grasslands. Every sound becomes sharper: branches cracking, hyenas laughing in the distance, the low rumble of lions. You feel the weight of hunger pressing on your bones, but stepping into the dark risks more than an empty stomach. To be human then was to live on the edge of fear, every moment balanced between the need to eat and the need to remain unseen. And yet, survival demanded adaptation. They scavenged what they could from the kills of other animals, their hands clutching stone tools chipped from river pebbles. A flake sharp enough to strip meat from bone, a hammerstone heavy enough to crack marrow. These were not luxuries, they were lifelines. For the marrow of a bone could mean the difference between another day of breathing or an early end. But hunger was not their only adversary. The climate itself was shifting beneath their feet. Around 2 million years ago, the world entered a cycle of dramatic climatic swings. Periods of relative warmth gave way to cooler, drier ages, reshaping the land in ways no creature could control. What had once been dense forests fractured into open grasslands. Waterholes disappeared. Species rose and vanished in quick succession. To be alive in this time was to live inside a storm of constant change. Perhaps this is why early humans endured when so many of their neighbors did not. Where other animals were bound to their niches, early hominins were forced to bend, to shift, to improvise. One season, they learned to stalk antelope herds across dry plains. Another season, they scavenged shellfish along shrinking lake shores. Maybe survival was never about strength, but about flexibility, the willingness to change shape with the world rather than perish resisting it. And yet the cost of survival was written in their numbers. Populations remained tiny, fragile threads stretched thin across Africa. A single disease, a single drought could have cut those threads and ended the story before it began. Scientists studying our DNA today see traces of those ancient vulnerabilities. We carry the fingerprints of bottlenecks where our ancestors dwindled to almost nothing, barely enough to carry the flame forward. Picture them in the dry season. Water is scarce, the grass brittle and yellow. A small band of hominins moves slowly across the plain, children stumbling after their parents, eyes scanning for fruit, for roots, for signs of a carcass. Buzzards wheel overhead, patient and certain. In the distance, a lion lifts its head. The group has no claws, no speed, no armor. Their only defense is each other's eyes watching every shadow, hands ready to scatter at the first sign of danger. At night, they huddle together, pressed close for warmth, whispering in voices that may have carried the first echoes of language. And you might wonder, how close did they come to vanishing in those early centuries? What if one drought had lasted just a little longer? What if one predator had struck at the wrong moment? Perhaps the story would have ended there, 2 million years ago, forgotten beneath the African dust. But it did not. Against all odds, the line held. These fragile bands, clinging to life on the edge of extinction, carried forward the spark that would one day blaze into cities, ships, and satellites. They had no way of knowing the weight of their survival, no way of imagining that every breath they drew was a step in a battle that would echo for millions of years. And so, the precarious beginning became the foundation of everything, a time when humanity was not inevitable, but improbable. A time when survival was measured not in triumphs, but in another sunrise. Yet this raises a haunting question. If their numbers were always so small, how many times did we almost lose it all? To see how thin the thread of existence truly was, we must look closer at the razor's edge of our survival, when even the smallest twist of fate could have erased us forever. There are moments in the human story when existence itself nearly dissolved, when the population of our ancestors dwindled to such fragile numbers that the future hung in the balance of chance. These were not narrow crises lasting weeks or years, but vast spans of time, measured in tens of thousands of generations. When we lived inside the jaws of extinction, modern genetics has uncovered the evidence written within us. Every strand of DNA carries whispers of the past, patterns of variation and loss that reveal how close we came to silence. When scientists compare the genetic diversity of humans today to that of other primates, the contrast is startling. Chimpanzees, scattered across forests in small communities, hold more genetic variety in their few 100,000 individuals than all 8 billion humans alive at this moment. Our family tree was pruned, again and again, until only thin branches remained. One of the most dramatic moments came nearly 900 years ago. At that time, something catastrophic occurred so severe that nearly 99% of our ancestors were erased. For more than 100 years, the global human population may have been reduced to as few as 280 breeding individuals. Imagine that. All of humanity compressed into a community smaller than a village, holding the weight of every future life that would ever exist. Perhaps it was climate. Around that time, Earth's rhythm of ice ages shifted. Where once the planet cycled through moderate cold and warmth every 41 years, the beat changed to brutal 100-year pulses. Ice sheets grew vast and unrelenting, seas shrank, and in Africa, the heartland of our ancestors, rainfall faltered. Woodlands withered into dry plains, rivers collapsed into dust, and prey animals dwindled. To live through such change was not merely difficult, it was nearly impossible. And yet, improbably, a few survived. Maybe they clung to a refuge near the Great Lakes of East Africa, where water and food remained. Perhaps they mastered fire earlier than others, harnessing flame to cook, to warm, to keep predators away. Whatever the secret, they endured. But the knife's edge was thin. One more drought, one more outbreak of disease, one more surge of predators, and the story would have ended. Later bottlenecks would strike again. Around 74 years ago, the Toba supervolcano erupted in Sumatra, spewing ash into the sky, dimming the sun, and choking the planet in a volcanic winter. Genetic signatures suggest our species once more dwindled to a fragile few thousand. The world itself seemed hostile to human existence, as if nature tested again and again whether we were worthy to remain. It is humbling to realize how easily those tests could have gone the other way. What if a single tribe had failed to find shelter from the cold? What if disease had spread unchecked through a band of survivors? Each what if carries the shadow of an entire world that never came to be. Picture a night in the aftermath of Toba. Ash falls like snow across the land, rivers run dark with silt, and herds collapse in hunger. A small cluster of humans gathers around a struggling fire. The sky is dim even at midday. Children cough as smoke drifts into their lungs. Adults scavenge what little remains: roots, insects, scraps of flesh from the bones of dead animals. This is not a scene of triumph, but of endurance at its most fragile. You can almost feel the silence pressing at the edges, the weight of extinction waiting to claim them. And yet, improbably, those huddled figures carried forward. They bore the fire through the storm, and within their veins flowed the only bloodlines that would survive to this day. Every human alive now carries the imprint of that narrow escape. But here lies the paradox. When populations shrink, survival becomes less likely, not more. Biologists call this the extinction vortex. With so few individuals, inbreeding grows, genetic defects accumulate, and the loss of diversity makes adaptation harder. Random disasters, a flood, a predator attack, a single epidemic can erase everything. By all logic, we should not have survived. And yet, for reasons still not fully understood, we did. Perhaps it was luck. Perhaps a hidden refuge in Africa held just enough resources to sustain a small group for millennia. Perhaps a random genetic change, such as the fusion of two chromosomes into what is now our chromosome 2, gave us unexpected advantages, influencing brain development and intelligence. If so, our survival was not simply persistence. It was an accident of biology, amplified by the razor-thin margins of survival. Consider the scale of chance. If you toss a die once, rolling a 6 seems unlikely. But if you must roll 6 after 6, again and again, across hundreds of thousands of years, the odds collapse into impossibility. Humanity's survival was that impossible series of rolls. Every bottleneck was a die cast against extinction. And still, improbably, The dice fell in our favor. And so, when you breathe tonight, you breathe with the weight of every near vanishing. You are the descendant of those who made it through fire and ice, famine and fear, against odds that should have silenced them. The razor's edge is not a metaphor. It was real, a narrow path walked by trembling feet in ancient darkness. What does it mean, then, that we are here, that we exist at all? Were we the chosen survivors of nature's endless trials, or were we merely the lucky few who slipped through when so many others fell? And if chance carried us this far, what does it mean for the future? To approach those questions, we must step into the landscapes that tested us most, into the fury of the ice ages, when cold itself became the engine of extinction. Cold has always been one of humanity's greatest enemies, not the chill of a winter's morning, not the frost that dusts fields today, but cold on a scale so vast that it remade continents and buried the world in silence. For nearly 2 million years, our ancestors lived under the rule of the ice ages, cycles of freezing and thawing so severe that they dictated every possibility of life or death. Imagine standing in Europe 600 years ago. The air is sharp, so dry and thin it cuts the lungs. Above you, the sky is washed pale, clouded with icy haze. To the north stretches a wall of ice hundreds of meters tall, a frozen cliff marking the edge of a glacier that sprawls for thousands of kilometers. It grinds mountains to dust beneath its weight, locks away oceans in frozen prisons, and drops sea levels by hundreds of feet. Valleys that were once rich grasslands lie barren, scoured by ice and wind. The earth itself is remade by cold. For early humans, these shifts were relentless. One age would freeze the land, forcing them southward, starving as plants and animals vanished. Then, slowly, warmth would return, forests spreading once more, rivers swelling, prey herds moving back into abandoned valleys. But the rhythm was merciless. The warm interludes were brief, the cold returns inevitable. Survival meant a life of perpetual migration, chasing pockets of food, fleeing the slow advance of the glaciers. And migration was no simple journey. To move south meant crossing rivers swollen with meltwater, deserts spreading in the wake of vanished rains, mountain ranges capped with snow. Whole groups perished on these paths. A single failed crossing, a single winter too long, and an entire band could vanish from the record. The fury of these cycles reshaped more than land, it reshaped humanity itself. Scientists see in the fossil record how species adapted, how bodies grew stockier in cold regions, how tools grew sharper, how strategies shifted to cope with scarcity. Ice acted as a relentless sculptor, pressing and grinding our kind until only the flexible remained. Think of the silence of a glacial night. The wind roars, carrying fine grains of ice that sting the skin like sand. Fires sputter in shallow pits dug against the gale. Families huddle close, wrapped in furs, every ember guarded as if it were life itself. Hunger is constant. The land offers little. Animals migrate far south. Plants lie dormant. Rivers freeze over. Each day becomes a negotiation with death. How to find food, how to keep warmth, how to endure one more sunrise. Genetic studies suggest that during some of these icy stretches, our populations contracted drastically. Each contraction was a near erasure, a thinning of the human line until it seemed impossible it could hold. Some researchers believe that entire human populations were cut off and extinguished, leaving only a few surviving pockets scattered across Africa and southern Asia. If so, then the ice ages were not just challenges, they were sieves, straining away countless lives and leaving only a handful to continue. The sheer scale of the glaciers is almost beyond imagination. At their peak, ice sheets stretched over North America, Europe, and Asia, burying whole landscapes under kilometers of frozen weight. Beneath the glaciers, the earth groaned. Rivers were crushed, forests obliterated, and even the horizon itself was altered. For humans, the land was never stable. Shores advanced and retreated as seas fell and rose. A fertile valley could become a desert in one lifetime. A hunting ground could vanish beneath ice in another. Perhaps this constant instability is why our ancestors learned to move, to wander, to never fully settle. Where other animals were bound to their ranges, humans became restless migrants. They followed herds across steppes, trailed rivers as they shifted, explored coasts newly exposed by retreating seas. The cold forced exploration, and exploration became instinct. But cold was not just an enemy, it was a sculptor of resilience. In the face of scarcity, humans learned cooperation, learned to share fire, learned to protect one another in groups. They developed tools sharper than claws, strategies more enduring than fangs. And yet, one cannot romanticize the suffering. Entire clans must have starved in those frozen centuries, their bones lost beneath the advancing ice. Whole languages may have died unspoken, whole cultures forgotten before they began. Still, something endured. Through migration, through starvation, through the endless pulse of cold and thaw, the fragile thread of humanity stretched forward. Imagine walking along a glacier's edge, white cliffs towering beside you, the air filled with the groan of moving ice. Ahead, your people move southward, carrying infants, tools, firebrands wrapped in bark. Behind you lies nothing but death. Ahead lies uncertainty. But there is no choice except forward. The fury of the ice ages was more than natural climate. It was the constant reminder that existence was not promised. For our ancestors, every horizon carried risk, every season was a test. And yet, by enduring those trials, they became something new, creatures who could bend to change rather than break. The question lingers: was survival through such fury inevitable, or was it a fragile accident? Could one harsher winter, one longer glacial advance, have ended everything? And if survival was so fragile then, how fragile is it still? To understand this even more deeply, we must look not only at the grandeur of ice, but at its merciless precision, how cold itself became the machine of extinction, grinding humanity down until only the smallest fragments remained. The ice did not simply shape the land, it carved its mark upon humanity itself. Each advance of the glaciers was not a season to be endured, but a judgment passed down by the planet who would live and who would vanish. The cold was not merely a backdrop, it was an extinction machine, patient and merciless, stripping away the weak until only the rare and the fortunate endured. Imagine a valley where a small clan once thrived. In warmer times, rivers ran wide, fish darted in currents, herds of antelope grazed across open plains. But then the climate shifted, the skies dimmed, and the cold descended. Snow lingered longer each year. Trees that once bore fruit grew stunted, then lifeless. Herds migrated south, beyond reach. By the time the ice closed in, the valley was silent. The clan faced choices that were no choices at all: abandon their home and march into the unknown, or remain and starve. Some did not make it. Entire families froze together in the snow, their fires sputtering out as the last wood was burned. Others scattered, fracturing into smaller groups that drifted apart and never rejoined. For every band that survived, dozens may have perished. The record of those who vanished is written only in absence, lineages erased from our DNA, languages unspoken, stories never told. Every glacial cycle was a roll of the dice: endure and pass the flame forward, fail and be forgotten. There was no guarantee that humanity would win the game more than once. Modern genetic evidence supports this grim truth. Our diversity is shockingly narrow compared to other species. It is as if we are the children of survivors picked again and again from smaller and smaller pools, reduced to fragments and rebuilt. This is the signature of bottlenecks, moments when humanity nearly ended. If we see ourselves as inevitable, the cold corrects us. We are the improbable residue of survival against odds too thin to measure. Picture the advancing ice as a living force. Kilometers thick, it groans and grinds, swallowing valleys, erasing forests, crushing rivers beneath its weight. To early humans, this must have seemed like the world itself turning against them. The sun grew weak, the air brittle, the ground unyielding. Survival demanded more than strength. It demanded foresight, stockpiling food, guarding fire, reading the sky. Those who adapted endured. Those who hesitated vanished. Speculatively, one can imagine entire populations blinking out in silence. A group of 100 souls pressed against the edge of a frozen steppe, their fires dwindling, their bodies thinning from hunger. The children grow quiet, the hunters return empty-handed, and then, one night, the cold seeps too deep, and by dawn, only frozen figures remain. Multiply this by thousands of winters across continents, and you begin to see how extinction haunted every generation. Yet, even in this relentless pruning, something remarkable occurred. Those who survived were shaped by the pressure. Cold demanded cooperation, solitary figures rarely lasted long. Groups that shared food, that protected their weak, that passed knowledge across generations were the ones that left descendants. In this way, the ice selected not only for resilience of body, but for resilience of community. The brutality of these winters also forged ingenuity. It is no coincidence that some of the earliest clear evidence of fire use appears around these times. Fire was not luxury, it was weapon, shield, and lifeline against extinction. Imagine the first spark kindled in the depths of glacial night. A branch struck, a coal carried from a smoldering log. Hands cupped around flame as snow fell outside. That flicker of light may have meant the difference between survival and erasure. Entire clans could have been frozen out had fire not been mastered when it was. But the ice showed no mercy, even to those with fire. Starvation remained the great equalizer. Archaeological evidence suggests that during glacial peaks, resources dwindled so severely that human populations may have been reduced to only a few thousand globally. Think of that scale. Billions of lineages narrowed to scraps. Every living human today is descended from those scraps, the few threads that did not break. Perhaps this is why humans carry such deep ancestral fear of cold and hunger. Myths across cultures speak of endless winters, of frozen wastelands, of famine that comes with the snow. These are not merely stories. They are echoes of memory passed through generations, whispers from ancestors who faced the extinction machine and barely stepped past it. And still, the dice rolled on. Each ice age was a new gamble. Some clans adapted following herds, inventing tools, learning to store food against the long dark. Others fell away, swallowed by silence. If one of those roles had fallen differently, if one winter had stretched too long, if one group had failed to carry fire forward, the story of humanity would have ended before it began. What makes this realization even more haunting is the scale of time. These were not singular events but repeated trials across hundreds of thousands of years. Generations lived and died without ever knowing warmth as we know it. To them, the cold was not a phase, it was the world itself. Survival was not expected, it was miraculous. And yet, we are here, which means that someone, somewhere, again and again, found a way to endure. Maybe they discovered a cave that held warmth longer than the wind outside. Maybe they followed migrating animals farther than any clan had gone before. Maybe they simply endured one more night than the clan beside them. From such small victories, the future unfolded. The cold was the machine, but survival was the spark. Against the grinding ice, against extinction itself, humanity persisted not by certainty, but by chance. Every living person carries that improbable inheritance, and still, a question remains. If every ice age was a roll of the dice, what happens when the dice finally fall against us? Are we survivors by destiny, or are we only delaying the silence that has already claimed so many before? To explore that further, we must look at the predators who once stalked us in the shadows, beasts for whom humans were not hunters, but prey. Long before humans became apex hunters, we were prey. The world was filled with teeth and claws, with eyes gleaming in the dark, with creatures larger, faster, and stronger than anything we could hope to match. To live as an early human was to live hunted. Imagine a night on the African plain 1.5 million years ago. The sky is wide, filled with stars, the air heavy with the smell of dust and grass. A small band of hominins huddles near a smouldering fire, its faint glow pushing back the dark. Beyond that fragile circle of light lies a kingdom that does not belong to them. Saber-toothed cats prowl silently, their canines longer than a man's hand. Giant hyenas, heavier and more powerful than any predator alive today, move in packs, jaws strong enough to crush bone. Cave lions, larger than modern lions, ruling the grasslands, stalk the shadows. Humans had no natural weapons to resist them, no claws, no armor, no speed to outrun, no fangs to fight back. Their bodies were fragile, skin thin, bones breakable, muscles weak compared to the predators that surrounded them. To survive in this landscape meant constant vigilance, listening for the snap of a branch, the rustle of grass, the low growl carried on the wind. Consider the saber-toothed cat. Built for ambush, it was not a sprinter like modern cheetahs, but a stalker, waiting in silence until it could leap with devastating force. Its canines could pierce deep into flesh, slicing arteries and ending life in a heartbeat. Fossil evidence shows that these cats specialized in preying on large herbivores, but to a small, scattered group of hominins, they were just as dangerous. Imagine carrying a child across an open plain, only to feel the weight of a predator crash from the grass, fangs flashing in the dark. Entire groups may have been lost this way, their lineages cut short in a single night. Then there were the giant hyenas. Unlike their smaller modern relatives, these were apex predators in their own right, weighing nearly twice as much as the largest hyenas alive today. They hunted in packs, coordinated, relentless. Their jaws could snap a femur with a single bite, splintering bone to reach the marrow within. To humans, they were not scavengers but executioners, capable of overwhelming even groups that tried to fight back. And looming largest of all, the cave lion, Panthera leospelea, the lion of the Ice Age, outsized its modern descendants, with males possibly weighing over 800 pounds. They dominated both Europe and Asia, and their remains have been found in caves once used by humans, suggesting that competition for shelter often turned deadly. To stumble into a den already claimed by these lions was to invite death. This was the reality of human existence for most of our history. Survival was not about domination, but about avoidance. We were not kings of the food chain. We were shadows on its edge, living between the moments when predators struck. Archaeological evidence bears out this grim truth. Many early hominin fossil sites are littered with bite marks, gnawed bones, skulls cracked open by hyena teeth, skeletons bearing the deep punctures of feline canines. Some caves that once sheltered humans also contain layers of predator remains, as if the two species had contested the same ground again and again. More than once, humanity must have lost. Perhaps this is why fire became more than warmth. In the glow of flames, predators hesitated. Smoke carried warning. The circle of light pushed back the dark. It was not an ultimate defense, but it was enough to make the night less absolute. For those without fire, the night remained a death sentence. Imagine walking through tall grass at dawn. The dew clings to your legs, birds stir in the trees, and then you hear it a rustle that is not the wind, the steady pad of paws following your steps. You clutch a stone, but it is nothing against the weight of the beast behind you. In that moment, the human body is only fragility. What saves you is not strength, but the group nearby, the eyes watching, the voices warning, the courage of numbers. Speculatively, entire clans must have been erased by predators. A lion striking at night could scatter a group, taking a child, then returning the next night for more. A pack of hyenas could follow a migrating band for days, attacking the weakest until nothing remained. The human line was thinned not only by hunger and cold, but by fangs that never relented. And yet, this constant vulnerability may have reshaped our minds. To be hunted is to live in anticipation, to scan the horizon, to remember danger, to teach children not through books but through stories spoken by the fire. Do not walk near the river at dusk. Do not sleep without a watch. Do not forget the smell of lion. Fear became knowledge, and knowledge became survival. Over time, humans began to shift from prey to something stranger. We were fragile bodies, but inside those bodies lived something predators could not anticipate: patience, cooperation, and eventually, strategy. A saber-toothed cat could kill in an instant, but a group of humans with stones and spears, planning together, could drive it away. A cave lion could claim a cave, but humans could return again and again, refusing to yield. Still, for millennia, the balance was not in our favor. The terror of predators was a constant drumbeat in human existence. Our ancestors carried that fear through every generation. And perhaps, even now, it lingers in us, our unease at the dark, our instinct to gather close in firelight, our stories of monsters watching from the shadows. In a world ruled by fangs and claws, humans survived not by strength, but by enduring long enough to find something greater. But before that turning point arrived, countless lives were claimed by the predators who ruled the night. Which leads us to a profound question: when did we stop being prey and begin to fight back? To answer that, we must step into one of the most transformative moments in human history, the discovery of fire, the first true weapon in our long war against extinction. The moment humanity first held fire was not simply a discovery. It was a revolution, a boundary crossed, a fragile species claiming something so powerful it would change the balance of existence forever. Before fire, the night belonged to predators. After fire, the night was ours. Imagine the scene. A storm rolls across the savannah, lightning tearing open the sky. A tree explodes in flame, sending sparks across the dry grass. Animals scatter from the blaze, but a group of early humans lingers at the edge, eyes wide with fear and wonder. They approach cautiously, drawn by the heat, the light, the strange crackling life of the flames. And then, whether by accident or intent, they carry a branch smoldering at the end, cradling it like a newborn. For the first time, fire does not die with the storm. It moves with them. At first, fire was fragile. A small blaze must be fed constantly. Embers had to be protected, carried in bundles of bark, nurtured like treasure. Losing fire meant returning to the dark, where predators circled and cold cut deep. Entire groups may have vanished because they failed to keep the flame alive, but those who succeeded found themselves transformed. The warmth of fire stretched the boundaries of survival. No longer did humans need to huddle only in the most sheltered places. Even in open plains, even in bitter cold, the fire created a pocket of safety. It kept frost from biting too deep, gave sleep back to bodies that once shivered through endless nights. Warmth was survival, and survival meant the thread of humanity held stronger than before. Cooking was the second gift. With fire, roots could be softened, meat roasted, toxins burned away. The body no longer wasted as much energy on digestion, and more nutrition was unlocked from every bite. Some scientists believe that fire altered the very trajectory of our species, fueling larger brains with the concentrated calories released by cooked food. Imagine the difference, gnawing raw meat until jaws ached, versus tender flesh falling apart with the touch of teeth. Fire turned survival from a daily struggle into something just a little more secure. But perhaps the greatest gift of all was defense. Predators hesitated before flame. Lions circled warily, hyenas slunk away, even saber-tooths stayed back when sparks flew. Fire did not make humans stronger, but it gave the illusion of strength, a shield of light that turned fragile prey into something untouchable. For the first time, humans could sit in a circle of safety, children sleeping in warmth while the night roared beyond. Fire did not just push back the dark, it pushed back extinction itself. Speculatively, one could say fire was humanity's first weapon in the war for survival. Not a spear, not a trap, but light itself, fire as a blade that cut predators from the night, as armor that wrapped around fragile bodies, as a signal that said, "Here, in this circle, the rules are different." To hold fire was to hold power over fear. Picture a band of humans migrating into colder lands. The wind howls, snow drifts high, but in the center of their camp a fire blazes. Flames lick upward, sparks drift into the night, and families gather close. Stories are spoken, shadows dance on faces, and for the first time in history, night becomes a place of gathering instead of terror. Fire was not only survival, it was community. It became the hearth, the center, the place around which humans began to share memory, to pass knowledge, to create culture. The archaeological record shows that Homo erectus may have used fire as early as 1.5 million years ago. Sites in Africa bear evidence of charred bones and ash, traces of hearths where early humans gathered. Later, in caves across Europe and Asia, layers of soot mark the ceilings, silent witnesses to fires that burned for generations. To think of these hearths is to imagine not just survival, but continuity, flames tended across centuries, one ember leading to the next, a chain unbroken through time. And yet, mastery of fire was not universal, nor immediate. For some groups, fire may have been rare, carried only when nature provided it, lost and regained through lightning strikes or volcanic eruptions. Others learned to kindle flame at will, striking stone against stone, coaxing sparks into life. Those who held this secret held an advantage so vast that it may have been the dividing line between survival and extinction. Speculatively, perhaps entire populations vanished because they failed to claim this gift. Without fire, cold winters killed, predators prowled unchecked, food remained hard and scarce. With fire, clans endured, grew, spread into harsher lands. The map of humanity's survival may be drawn in circles of light scattered across darkness, those with flame surviving, those without extinguished. Think of what fire gave beyond the practical. It gave time. In darkness, without fire, humans huddled silent, waiting for dawn. With fire, they lingered, spoke, shared. Knowledge passed more easily when nights were long and flames bright. Around those early hearths, language may have deepened, myths may have formed, bonds may have tightened. Fire was not just heat, it was story. And in story lay strength. To remember where predators hunted, to recall which roots were poisonous, to pass down the memory of seasons, all of this depended on speech, on shared memory. Fire created the space for memory to live. Perhaps it is not an exaggeration to say that human culture itself was born in the firelight. But fire also carried danger. Flames could spread uncontrollably, consuming grasslands, forests, even camps themselves. Embers could die, leaving groups vulnerable again. To master fire was to dance with risk, to treat it as both ally and threat. Those who balanced this dance walked forward into the future. Those who failed were left in ashes. Over millennia, fire grew from tool to weapon, from hearth to forge. But in its first incarnation, it was simple survival. The warmth that staved off death, the light that turned night into safety, the spark that kept the thread of humanity unbroken when so much else pressed in to cut it. So when did humans stop being prey? Perhaps the answer lies here, not in stronger bodies or sharper claws, but in the flames they carried forward. Fire was the first step in claiming agency over a hostile world, the first act of defiance against extinction. It was the dawn of a new kind of creature, not the fastest, not the strongest, but the one who could bend the world with light. And yet, fire was only one weapon in a long war. The cold would still return, predators would still stalk, volcanoes would still erupt. What fire offered was not certainty, but chance, a fighting chance in a universe that had given us so little room to endure. From here, the battle only grew harsher. To see just how fragile survival remained, we must step into one of the most devastating events our species ever faced, the eruption of Toba, when the sky itself turned against us and humanity nearly vanished into ash. 74,000 years ago, the earth convulsed. In what is now Sumatra, a supervolcano erupted with a force unlike anything modern humans have ever witnessed. The eruption of Mount Toba was not merely a local disaster, it was a planetary cataclysm, a moment when the very sky became an enemy, and humanity, already fragile, was pushed to the brink of annihilation. Imagine the sound, a roar so immense it would have shaken continents, echoing across oceans. Ash shot more than 30 miles into the atmosphere, billowing upward in towering plumes. Rivers of molten rock poured from the earth, forests incinerated in an instant, mountains reshaped in fire. The eruption carved a crater 100 kilometers wide, Lake Toba's vast basin still marking the scar today. But the greater devastation was not in Sumatra itself. It was in the sky. Ash and sulfur dioxide filled the atmosphere, spreading across the globe in a choking veil. Within days, sunlight dimmed. Within weeks, the earth began to cool. What followed was a volcanic winter years, perhaps decades, of cold skies, dying plants, and starving animals. For humanity, this was the crucible. Populations collapsed. Genetic evidence suggests that our species may have been reduced to as few as a few thousand breeding individuals worldwide. Imagine that scale. Billions of potential futures reduced to a handful of survivors scattered across Africa and Asia, clinging to life while the sky remained black. Picture a band of humans in East Africa during those years. The sun rises, but it is a pale disk behind grey clouds. The air tastes of ash. Crops of wild grains fail. Herds vanish, lakes shrink. Children grow thin, their bellies swollen with hunger. The adults forage desperately roots, insects, scraps of meat from carcasses, but each day yields less than the last. Night comes early, the stars hidden, the world cloaked in smoke. This is not a single season of hardship. This is a famine that lasts for generations. The ashfall itself may have blanketed regions in meters of choking dust. In India, layers of volcanic ash still lie as geological testimony to the scale of the disaster. Forests suffocated, rivers clogged, animals died in vast numbers. To walk the land, then, was to walk through silence, broken only by the cries of scavengers. And yet, humanity endured. How? Perhaps it was luck, small groups finding ecological refuges, regions less affected by the fallout. Some researchers suggest that pockets of eastern and southern Africa, near Great Lakes and coasts, remained habitable enough to sustain small populations. Others speculate that cultural innovations such as improved tools, cooperation, or early symbolic communication helped some groups weather the long famine while others perished. Whatever the reason, survival was not widespread. It was narrow, thin, improbable. Think of the genetic bottleneck this left behind. All humans today are descendants of those few thousand who carried the species through the shadow of Toba. Our reduced genetic diversity is a scar from that time, a reminder that once we were almost erased. We are not a vast lineage stretching unbroken. We are the children of survivors who clung to life by their fingertips while the rest were lost. Speculatively, one might imagine entire human branches extinguished, languages never spoken again, cultures erased without memory, innovations lost before they could spread. Perhaps there were clans in northern Africa or Western Asia with fire, tools, art, but the ash smothered them, and only silence remained. What we call human history is not the story of all who lived. It is the story of the few who made it past Toba. The psychological weight of this event cannot be underestimated. To live through years of dimmed skies and endless hunger is to be shaped by fear. Myths of darkness, floods, fire, and wrath echo across cultures even today. Could these stories be faint memories of Toba, carried through thousands of generations, reshaped into myth but rooted in truth? Perhaps when ancient people told tales of a sun blotted out, of endless night, of a world covered in ash, they were remembering what it was like to survive that great silence. For scientists, Toba remains one of the most important turning points in prehistory. It reminds us how fragile our survival has always been. A single eruption, one mountain tearing itself open, reduced humanity to a near whisper. If the ash had lingered longer, if the famine had been harsher, if the survivors had been fewer, perhaps the story would have ended there. The earth would have continued, forests regrown, animals thrived, but without us. The sheer improbability of our survival lingers. When you breathe now, when you see sunlight breaking through clouds, you are connected to those who breathed ash and prayed for the light to return. Their persistence is the only reason you exist at all. And yet, as catastrophic as Toba was, it was not unique. Volcanoes have erupted before and since. The earth is full of such potential catastrophes. What makes Toba different is timing. Humanity was fragile then, still scarce, still vulnerable. One eruption nearly ended us. That it did not is the narrowest of miracles. So as we reflect on the fury of Toba, we must ask, was our survival inevitable, a destiny written in resilience? Or was it only the luck of being in the right refuge at the right time? To press deeper into that haunting uncertainty, we must step into the aftermath itself, a world where populations were reduced to scraps, where the species teetered on the edge of silence, and where survival was anything but guaranteed. In the shadow of Toba, humanity was reduced to embers. Populations crashed to scraps of survival, fragments scattered across Africa and Asia, clinging to whatever resources the earth still offered. In those years, the line between survival and extinction was so fine that even the smallest shift, a longer winter, a missed migration, a failed fire might have erased us forever. Speculatively, if the eruption had lasted just a little longer, if the volcanic haze had lingered in the atmosphere another decade, perhaps humanity would have ended. We would not be cities and satellites and stories. We would be fossils, buried in ash, another species remembered only by bones. Picture the aftermath. The world is grey, silent, stripped of life. Herds that once thundered across the savannas lie dead, their bones picked clean. Forests wither, rivers choke on ash. The air tastes of dust, dry and bitter, each breath carrying the reminder that the sky itself has turned hostile. In this wasteland, a few hundred humans forage along a lake's shore, their bodies gaunt, their eyes hollow. They survive not because they are destined, but because the patch of land they inhabit happens to receive just enough rain, just enough sunlight breaking through the gloom to sustain them. Survival is not triumph. It is geography. It is chance. Genetic evidence supports this narrow escape. Traces in our DNA point to a population bottleneck so severe that the entire human species may have been reduced to fewer than 20 breeding individuals. To put this in perspective, a single village carried the fate of all future humanity. If famine had claimed them, if disease had swept through their camp, if predators had found them in the night, there would be no us. The earth would have rolled on, indifferent, without ever knowing what we could have become. And yet, against the silence, a few bands endured. Perhaps they found shelter in caves along the Rift Valley. Perhaps they relied on fishing in great lakes less affected by drought. Perhaps they scavenged whatever remained when larger animals starved. Each survival strategy was fragile, each choice a gamble. The species was reduced not only in number, but in diversity. Whole lineages, whole languages, whole possibilities vanished without a trace. We are the children, not of a vast humanity, but of fragments that managed to persist. Speculatively, one might imagine entire cultures erased. Maybe there were groups who had begun experimenting with art, carving shapes into stone or bone, painting with ochre on cave walls. Maybe they had songs, rituals, myths that bound them together, but the ash fell, the animals died, the famine spread and their voices were silenced. Those songs will never be heard. Those myths will never be known. All that remains is the silence they left behind. The survivors did not endure because they were the strongest. They endured because of timing, of luck, of being in the right refuge when the world collapsed. That is the uncomfortable truth of Toba. Our survival was not inevitable. It was contingent, fragile, improbable. And yet, from these scraps, the future unfolded. Those who clung to life after Toba became the ancestors of every human alive today. Within their small bands carried the spark of art, of culture, of language, of everything that would come to define us. But at the time, they could not have known this. For them, each day was simply hunger, cold, and the thin hope of another sunrise. Imagine sitting with them in a cave as ash drifts outside. The fire crackles weakly, children cough, the elders whisper stories of when the skies were blue, when herds filled the plains, but no one knows if those times will ever return. In their silence lies the weight of extinction, a shadow that lingers across every breath. Perhaps this explains why, deep in our myths, we remember catastrophes, floods, fire, endless winters. These stories echo across cultures not because they were imagined, but because they were lived. They are the memory of Toba, passed through countless generations, reshaped into legend but rooted in fear. Even today, the idea of apocalypse stirs something primal within us. That is not new anxiety. It is the echo of survival on the brink. For scientists, the lesson of Toba is sobering. A single eruption nearly ended us. Not a meteor, not a galaxy-spanning event, but one mountain tearing itself open. If it had lasted longer, if the survivors had been fewer, if chance had rolled differently, we would not exist. This is the razor's edge of our history. Not destiny, but luck. And yet, the paradox remains. From that brink came resilience. Those who survived carried with them the memory of catastrophe, shaping future generations into beings who would always anticipate disaster, always prepare for scarcity, always imagine the worst to endure the worst. Extinction did not take us, but it carved us. So when you think of humanity's story, remember this. It is not the tale of inevitability, but of fragility. We are here not because we were guaranteed to survive, but because we were lucky enough to slip past the silence when the world seemed intent on erasing us. But Toba was only one trial. before and after, famine and drought, predators and ice, always pressed against us. To understand how survival shaped our kind, we must step into the long ages of scarcity, when hunger itself became the most persistent enemy of all. Hunger is perhaps the oldest companion of humanity. Long before agriculture, before abundance, before fields of grain bent beneath the wind, our ancestors lived in a constant state of uncertainty. Every day was a wager against famine, every season a question: would there be enough to survive until the next? The age of scarcity was not one moment but an endless pattern. Droughts would parch the land, rivers shrank into trickles, herds migrated beyond reach, plants withered in the sunday. Failed hunts left bellies empty for days. Children cried through the night, their voices thin, their bodies weaker with each sunrise. Adults scavenged what little remained, roots bitter with toxins, seeds so small they had to be gathered by the handful, marrow scraped from old bones. Every scrap was precious, every bite contested. Imagine walking with a small tribe across a cracked savanna. The earth is split into jagged lines by the heat. Dust clings to your skin, and the horizon shimmers with mirages. The hunters return empty-handed. There are no herds here anymore, only silence. In desperation, the group digs into the earth, searching for roots, for tubers that might hold a drop of water. Fingernails break in the soil, but at last a root is pulled free. It is split among 10 people, each receiving almost nothing, yet clinging to it as life. In such conditions, brutal choices were forced upon them. Who would eat? Who would wait? Who would be left behind when the tribe moved on? To survive meant deciding not only how to share, but sometimes who would not be carried. Entire groups fractured when food grew too scarce, splitting into smaller bands, each hoping that fewer mouths would mean more chance of survival. Some succeeded, others perished in isolation. Competition was constant. Tribes clashed not for conquest, but for scraps of territory where water still flowed, where fruit still grew, where animals still passed. Violence was not born of ambition, but of starvation. A single watering hole could become the center of life and death, guarded as fiercely as any fortress. In those confrontations, early humans learned what it meant to fight not for land, but for existence. The archaeological record shows clear evidence of these struggles. Cut marks on bones reveal that humans scavenged carcasses stripped by other predators, prying what little flesh remained. In times of desperation, even marrow became treasure, cracked from bones with stone tools to extract the last reserves of fat. These were not meals of choice, but of necessity. The line between survival and starvation was measured in crumbs, and still, scarcity was more than physical. It was psychological. To live in constant hunger reshapes the mind. Fear of famine lingers long after the belly is filled. Even today, our instincts, our drive to store, to hoard, to overconsume, may be echoes of those millennia when scarcity defined us. Perhaps our nightmares of running out, of being left behind, are not modern anxieties at all, but ancestral memories of hunger that never ended. Speculatively, entire lineages may have been erased in these famines. Groups who failed to find water, who chose the wrong path during migration, who exhausted their land too quickly, they are gone, their stories untold. What survives in us is not the memory of their disappearance, but the resilience of those who found a way. And yet, resilience did not always look like strength. Sometimes it looked like quiet patience waiting for rains to return, gathering seeds one by one, enduring hunger long enough to see another season. Sometimes it looked like ingenuity, discovering that a bitter root could be made edible by cooking, or that a shellfish hidden in the mud could sustain life. Sometimes it looked like cruelty, leaving the weakest behind so the rest could continue. Survival was not noble, it was desperate. Picture a child too weak to walk, carried on a mother's hip as the group moves toward the distant shimmer of water. Each step is agony, but stopping is not an option. Behind them, the land offers nothing. Ahead lies only the hope that the mirage resolves into a lake, not an illusion. If they reach it, perhaps they live another week. If not, their bones will join the dust. This was the reality of early humanity for millennia. Scarcity was not an interruption of life, it was life. Abundance, when it came, was fleeting. A brief interlude before the next drought, the next failed hunt, the next collapse of resources. The human story was written not in triumphs, but in the endless negotiation with hunger. And yet, paradoxically, scarcity may have been the crucible of our greatness. It forced cooperation, ingenuity, and foresight. It drove us to create tools, to plan hunts, to share knowledge. Without scarcity, perhaps there would have been no need for strategy, no incentive for culture, no urgency for innovation. Our fragility was also our forge. Still, the cost was immense. Billions of possible lives were erased across those long ages. Entire clans, entire languages, entire possibilities never saw the future. We are the descendants of the few who endured not because they were destined, but because they managed, somehow, to navigate the endless trial of hunger. As we drift deeper into this story, the question sharpens. Did scarcity select us, shaping us into creatures of resilience, or did we merely stumble through by chance, lucky enough to survive one famine after another? To explore this further, we must turn to the one force that made survival possible, not through strength, but through unity. Cooperation, the fragile, improbable bond that allowed tribes to endure when individuals could not. If hunger was the test, then cooperation was the answer. Alone, the early human was fragile, slow on the plains, weak in the forests, vulnerable to predators, starvation, and cold. But together, moving, sharing, organizing humans became something new. Cooperation was not a luxury, it was survival. Imagine a small band gathered around a struggling fire in the dry season. Food is scarce, bellies are empty. One hunter has returned with only a handful of tubers, bitter but edible. Another carries a few scraps of marrow bones, scavenged from a lion's kill. If each hoarded their find, some would eat while others starved. But if they pooled it, however meager, every member of the band would survive the night. It was in such decisions, share or divide, cooperate or fracture, that the future of our species was written. Speculatively, extinction weeded out the selfish, those who refused to share, who hoarded food, who abandoned companions, may have gained in the short term. But in the long term, such strategies weakened the group. A single human cannot keep watch against predators all night. A lone mother cannot both carry her child and forage for food. A wounded hunter cannot heal without help. Groups that lacked cooperation dissolved under the pressures of famine, cold, and attack. Their lineages vanished. The selfish disappeared. But groups that shared survived. Cooperation was a survival strategy, written not in ideals, but in necessity. Those who helped one another endured the hunger, fended off predators, carried fire into new lands. Their children inherited not only their genes but their ways of life. Across generations, cooperation became instinct, carved into the human mind as deeply as fear of the dark. Anthropologists believe this is why humans developed such a profound sense of social bonding. We are wired for empathy, for communication, for mutual awareness, because in the crucible of prehistory, those who lacked these traits perished. When you feel compelled to share, when you are moved by another's suffering, you are hearing the echoes of survival strategies older than civilization itself. Picture a hunt. A group of early humans gathers at dawn, their stone-tipped spears in hand. Alone, no one could bring down a large animal. But together, coordinated, patient, they drive a herd toward an ambush. Some shout and wave, others wait with poised weapons. At the critical moment, they strike. The kill is not just food, it is proof that unity is stronger than isolation. The rewards of cooperation extended beyond hunting. In times of scarcity, information was as valuable as meat. One member of the group who knew where roots grew, where water pooled, or when herds would migrate, could mean the difference between life and death for all. Knowledge became communal. Memory was shared. And through shared memory came culture, the beginning of something that would one day become myth, story, language. Speculatively, this is how human morality was born. In a world where selfishness meant extinction, behaviors like generosity, loyalty, and fairness were not abstract virtues. They were survival traits. Over time, these traits solidified into the fabric of human societies. The reason betrayal and greed feel so wrong, so dangerous even today, may be because for most of our history, such actions truly did threaten the survival of the tribe, and cooperation was not limited to food. It extended to defense. When predators circled the camp, a single individual could not hold them off, but a group, armed with firebrands and stones, could drive them away. The sight of a dozen figures shouting in unison, flames raised against the dark, must have startled even the most fearsome beasts. Together, fragile humans created an illusion of invincibility. Consider also the care of the weak. Fossil evidence shows that early humans sometimes cared for individuals who were sick or injured, keeping them alive far longer than they could have managed alone. A broken leg, left untreated in the wild, is a death sentence. But bones of early hominins reveal healed fractures, proof that others carried, fed, and protected them until they recovered. Such acts of compassion were not charity, they were insurance. Every life preserved meant another set of eyes, another pair of hands, another chance of survival. The hearth was the center of this cooperation. Around the fire, food was shared, stories were told, bonds were strengthened. Firelight extended the day, creating hours when humans could connect without the immediate pressure of foraging. Here, ideas could be exchanged, plans made, myths born. Cooperation was not only about surviving hunger, but about weaving the invisible fabric that held groups together. Speculatively, cooperation may also have determined which groups spread and which faded. Bands that worked together could migrate farther, adapt faster, endure longer. They carried fire across deserts, built shelters against snow, learned to fish rivers and hunt plains. Those who fractured were left behind, their lines ending in silence. But cooperation was fragile, always tested by scarcity. The balance between sharing and self-preservation was never simple. Famine strained bonds. Drought drove tribes into conflict over water. Even among the cooperative, fractures could appear. Yet time and again, it was unity, not isolation, that carried humanity forward. Imagine yourself in that world. The night is cold, the fire small, the food almost gone. You sit shoulder to shoulder with your kin, listening to the low murmur of voices. Someone passes you a scrap of roasted root, small, bitter, but given freely. In that moment, you realize that survival is not about strength or even luck. It is about one hand reaching for another, one voice calling out in the dark, one spark of generosity keeping the tribe alive. Cooperation, then, was not only a strategy but a filter. Those who embraced it survived, those who did not vanished. This was natural selection, written not in claws or fangs, but in bonds of trust and acts of sharing. Humanity, fragile as we were, endured because we learned to face extinction together. But cooperation, though powerful, was not the only trial. Beyond hunger and scarcity, beyond even predators, humanity faced rivals of its own kind, other species of human, each vying for survival on the same shrinking planet. To understand how we became the last human standing, we must step into those encounters, when survival meant not only unity within the tribe, but also competition with those who were, in every sense, our kin. For most of prehistory, we were not alone. The world was shared by others who looked like us, walked like us, and lived as humans in every way, yet they were not us. The planet was once crowded with rival species, Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans across the East, Homo erectus lingering in parts of Asia, and still others, now shadows in the fossil record. Survival was not simply a struggle against famine or predators, it was a contest among humans themselves. Imagine standing on a cold steppe in Ice Age Europe 60 years ago. Your small band of Homo sapiens has traveled far from Africa, following herds of reindeer across frozen plains. But these lands are not empty. In the distance, another fire glows against the night. Around it gather figures stockier than you, their faces broader, their brows heavier. Neanderthals. They are not strangers of fur and fang. They are human too. They make tools. They hunt. They bury their dead. But they are not your people, and the resources you share are scarce. The archaeological record paints a picture of both contact and conflict. Tools of Neanderthal design lie alongside those of early Homo sapiens in caves across Europe. Fossils carry the traces of interbreeding DNA that still lives in us today, making up 1 to 2% of the genomes of people outside Africa. But bones also bear signs of violence, fractures, cut marks, evidence of lethal encounters. Sometimes we mixed, often we clashed. Neanderthals were not lesser beings. They were powerful, intelligent, and resilient. For hundreds of thousands of years, they endured the cold of Ice Age Europe, thriving in conditions that would have killed us without fire and furs. Their bodies were stocky and strong, built for retaining heat. Their muscles were immense, their bones dense. If you faced a Neanderthal in combat, you would not win by strength. But strength alone was not enough. In the long game of survival, flexibility mattered more. Then there were the Denisovans, known only from a handful of bones and the genetic traces they left behind. They occupied vast territories across Asia, interbreeding with both Neanderthals and us. In Tibet, their DNA lingers in modern populations, granting adaptation to high altitudes. Imagine meeting them on the Asian steppes, humans whose faces we do not fully know, whose language we cannot guess, but who carried skills, tools, and survival strategies of their own. They, too, were vying for the same land, the same prey, the same rivers. Speculatively, encounters among these species must have been fraught with tension. A watering hole could become the site of confrontation, each group watching the other with suspicion. Did they communicate? Did they trade? Or did they raise weapons the moment paths crossed? Perhaps all of these were true, depending on the time, the place, the desperation of the season. Interbreeding tells us that not every encounter was violent. Some groups mingled, some bonds formed, children born of mixed heritage. These unions left permanent marks in our DNA, proof that the boundaries between species were not absolute. But interbreeding was not enough to save the others. One by one, they vanished. Neanderthals, gone by 40 years ago. Denisovans, fading into mystery. Homo erectus, extinct even earlier. Of the many humans who once walked the earth, only we remain. Why? That question haunts the study of our origins. Neanderthals were stronger. Denisovans were adapted to vast environments. Other humans had endured for millions of years. Why did they fall while we endured? Perhaps the answer lies in flexibility. Homo sapiens could adapt not just biologically, but culturally. We shifted strategies quickly, inventing new tools, new forms of hunting, new ways of organizing. Neanderthals made excellent tools, but their designs changed slowly. Our tools evolved in generations, theirs in millennia. In a world where survival hinged on rapid adaptation, that difference may have been decisive. Speculatively, cooperation also played a role. Homo sapiens bands may have been larger, their social networks wider. Where Neanderthals lived in small, isolated groups, we may have formed broader alliances, exchanging knowledge and resources across greater distances. This web of connection allowed us to endure where others fractured. But the process was not clean. Imagine the last encounters. A small group of Neanderthals, dwindling, encounters a band of Homo sapiens pressing into their territory. There is no room for both. Do they fight? Do they merge? Or do the Neanderthals retreat, dwindling further into silence? Their end was not a single event, but a slow erosion, 1,000 small defeats, until one day there were none left. Even now, their ghosts live within us. The shape of our immune systems, our ability to thrive in certain climates, our very blood chemistry, these carry the fingerprints of other humans long extinct. When you breathe at high altitude, when your body fights disease, you may be drawing on the inheritance of Neanderthal or Denisovan ancestors. Their extinction was not complete, it was absorption. Still, the reality remains. We are the last. The Earth was once a shared stage, a tapestry of different human kinds. Today, only Homo sapiens remains, and that survival was not inevitable. It was the outcome of countless encounters, sometimes violent, sometimes intimate, always fraught with the question of who would endure when the world offered room for only one. As we turn from these encounters, we must ask, what was it about us that gave us the final edge? Was it strength? No, for we were not the strongest. Was it intellect? Perhaps, though others too were intelligent. Or was it something subtler, a capacity for adaptation, for strategy, for imagination that allowed us to survive where others fell? To answer, we must look at the heart of our survival strategy, the power of adaptation itself, and how it transformed us from one species among many into the last human standing. Our victory was not one of strength. It was not brawn, nor brute force, nor the thickness of bone or the size of muscle. It was something quieter, subtler, yet infinitely more powerful. The ability to adapt, to shift strategies when the world shifted beneath our feet, to imagine possibilities and act upon them. That was the weapon that carried Homo sapiens beyond extinction while our kin fell into silence. Imagine two camps separated by a valley. In one, Neanderthals prepare for the hunt. Their tools are finely crafted, their spears solid and heavy, their bodies strong. They hunt with courage and skill, just as they have for thousands of years. In the other, Homo sapiens gather. Their tools are lighter, more varied projectile weapons, stone blades, nets woven from fibers. They share knowledge quickly, adjusting their techniques from season to season. One camp is strength, the other is flexibility. Flexibility wins. Archaeological evidence reveals that Homo sapiens developed tools at a pace unmatched by their cousins. Where Neanderthal designs remained largely unchanged for millennia, ours shifted in decades. We created sewing needles to stitch furs into clothing, fish hooks to exploit rivers and seas, bows to kill from a distance. When prey disappeared from one valley, we adapted. When climates shifted, we followed. We did not cling to the old ways, we invented new ones. Speculatively, this flexibility extended beyond tools. It lived in language. The human tongue became more than communication, it became strategy. With words, we could plan hunts in detail, assign roles, warn of dangers, teach knowledge to the young. Language transformed groups into units greater than the sum of their parts. It was not enough to have sharp spears. We had sharp stories, sharp instructions, sharp warnings. The spoken word itself was a survival tool, and language opened the door to culture. Around the fire, early humans passed down memories of famine and flood. of predators and refuge. They did not need each generation to discover survival anew. Knowledge was preserved, carried forward, refined. Myths encoded warnings, songs mapped migrations, stories remembered the dangers of rivers or forests. Culture was memory stretched across time. It gave us the advantage of accumulated wisdom, where others faced each challenge as if it were new. Strategy, too, was adaptation. Where Neanderthals hunted close, we hunted at range. Where others relied on strength, we relied on patience. Persistence hunting, chasing prey not with speed, but with endurance until the animal collapsed from exhaustion was one of our earliest tactics. Few predators could match it. We did not need to overpower. We needed only to outlast. Speculatively, even our social structures may have been adaptations. Evidence suggests Homo sapiens lived in larger, more interconnected bands than Neanderthals. These networks meant broader exchange of knowledge, more diverse mates, stronger defenses. When famine struck one group, another might provide. When prey vanished in one region, knowledge of another could be shared. This web of connection created resilience that isolated populations lacked. Flexibility also shaped our imagination. Where others saw only what was present, we imagined what could be. The concept of a spear thrower, of storing food, of painting symbols, of building shelters, all of these required seeing beyond the immediate. That spark of imagination gave us futures that did not yet exist, and when the world shifted as it always did, we were already thinking ahead. Yet we must not romanticize this too much. Adaptation was not inevitable. Many Homo sapiens groups must have failed. Not all innovations succeeded. Not every strategy worked. Countless bands perished despite their flexibility, their ideas lost before they could spread. What remains is not a smooth story of progress, but a jagged survival of the few whose adaptations happened to align with the demands of the moment. Still, the pattern is clear. Our advantage was not muscle, but mind. Not certainty, but improvisation. When the planet demanded change, we bent instead of breaking, and bending became our defining trait. Picture a sudden drought. The herds vanish. For Neanderthals, this may have been devastation, for their hunting strategies were tied to large game. But for Homo sapiens, adaptation meant finding new foods, roots, shellfish, birds, smaller animals. It was not abundance, but it was enough. In the cracks of scarcity, flexibility found room to survive. Or picture a sudden freeze, when ice swept across the land. Fur clothing stitched with bone needles, fire carried carefully. Shelters built from wood and hide. These adaptations allowed Homo sapiens to push into environments where others faltered. We did not conquer the cold. We endured it by imagining ways to outwit it. Speculatively, even our art may have been adaptation. Cave paintings of animals, etched lines on bones, beads strung from shells. These were not luxuries. They were memory systems, communication tools, symbols of identity that bound groups together. Art was not decoration. It was survival dressed in beauty. The extinction of our cousins was not predetermined. It was a contest of strategies, and in that contest, adaptability was the decisive edge. We were not the strongest, not the fiercest, not even the most enduring in body, but we were the most flexible. We shifted, we changed, we improvised, and from that, survival followed. Yet this triumph is haunted by fragility. If flexibility saved us, it also reminds us how close we always were to collapse. We did not rise as victors standing tall above fallen rivals. We rose because, by chance and adaptation, we endured just slightly longer. The difference between survival and extinction was never wide. It was razor thin. And so, when you look at the world around you today, at cities rising, at technology stretching into the stars, remember that it was born not of certainty, but of adaptability in the face of disaster. We are the descendants of those who improvised, who shared, who imagined. That is our legacy, our weapon, our fragile shield against oblivion. But adaptation was tested not only by rivals. Again and again, extinction circled us. Predators, famine, volcanoes, ice. Each cycle brought humanity to the edge, and each time we slipped through by chance. To see the scale of our improbable survival, we must look back at death's narrow escapes, when every dice roll could have been our last. The story of humanity is not one of smooth ascent. It is a tale of near disasters, of countless moments when the thread of our existence frayed to almost nothing. Again and again, we stood at the edge of silence, our survival determined not by certainty, but by chance. Think of predators. For millions of years, we were prey animals, fragile and exposed. Every night carried the risk of ambush by saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, or cave lions. One roar in the dark could scatter a tribe. A single pounce could erase a lineage. Survival depended on luck as much as vigilance, being in the right place, with fire still burning, with eyes alert at the right moment. How many bands were wiped out in the night, their bones scattered on the plains, their stories untold. Then came famine. Droughts struck without warning. Rivers dried, grasslands cracked, herds migrated away, leaving silence behind. Entire bands may have wandered in search of food only to find none. Survival came down to whether they discovered a hidden patch of roots, or stumbled upon shellfish along a coast, or reached a lake before thirst overtook them. For every group that endured, others starved. Famine was the constant spectre, pressing us again and again to the brink. And what of fire from the earth itself? The eruption of Toba nearly erased us, but it was not alone. Other volcanoes erupted across prehistory, ash clouds dimming the skies, food chains collapsing. Each eruption was a roll of the dice. If the ash had lingered longer, if the survivors had been fewer, the story would have ended there. Our survival was never guaranteed, it was luck layered upon luck. Ice was another executioner. The advance of glaciers reshaped continents, locked away oceans, and drove humans south into smaller and smaller refuges. Cold killed silently through frostbite, starvation, and disease. A single harsh winter could decimate a group, while another, in a slightly warmer valley, endured. Chance decided which valleys held warmth, which rivers still flowed, which caves offered shelter. Humanity endured not because we were destined to, but because some of us happened to be in the right places when the world froze over. And finally, rivals. Other humans once walked beside us, Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus. Each encounter carried the possibility of survival or extinction. Sometimes we mingled, leaving traces of their DNA within us. But often, competition for land, food, and shelter turned deadly. Imagine two groups meeting at a river in drought. There is only enough water for one. Violence follows, and one group disappears. Which one survives is not determined by destiny, but by the unpredictable outcome of conflict. Speculatively, the number of near extinctions may be beyond counting. Each drought, each eruption, each predator attack was a narrowing gate through which only a few passed. We should not be here. The odds of surviving all of them are so small that our existence feels less like inevitability and more like miracle. Not a miracle of purpose, perhaps, but a miracle of chance. Picture the world 100 years ago. Scattered across continents are small human bands, each numbering only dozens, at most hundreds. Each faces predators, hunger, cold, and rivals. Each night could be their last. Yet among them are the survivors, those who find food when others cannot, who keep fire alive, who cross rivers safely, who endure winters by huddling together. Every survival is improbable. Every survival is a narrow escape. We are the children of those escapes. Every breath you take carries the weight of ancestors who should not have lived long enough to pass on life. Their survival was never certain. It was always conditional, always fragile, always one step from ending. Speculatively, if you trace your lineage back far enough, you would find hundreds of points where extinction nearly claimed your ancestors. A predator's missed leap, a drought survived by stumbling upon one last spring, an eruption endured by chance of geography. At each point, the coin could have fallen the other way, and if it had, you would not exist. None of us would. This is why we should not be here. The odds were too long, the dice too cruel, the trials too severe, and yet, here we are. 8 billion lives carried forward from those fragile survivors, from those who endured narrow escapes while countless others fell into silence. And so, we must ask, if humanity survived not through certainty but through chance, what does that mean for our place in the world? Are we rare victors, or are we merely the lucky remnants of 1,000 extinctions that could have claimed us at any moment? To press deeper into this haunting question, we must step into the mathematics of survival itself, into the impossible odds that define our very existence. To exist at all is to stand against probability. Humanity should not be here. We are the improbable survivors of 1,000 lost rolls of the dice, each catastrophe narrowing the chances further, each trial making our continued existence less likely. When you trace the story back, the sheer unlikelihood of it overwhelms. Existence itself becomes the greatest improbability. Picture the chain of survival. Each ancestor, each generation, had to live long enough to pass on life. A single broken bone that failed to heal, a predator's leap landing true, a drought lasting one season too long, and the chain would have ended. Multiply this across 2 million years, across countless crises, and the probability shrinks to nearly nothing. Yet here we are, alive against all calculations. Speculatively, one might think of humanity's survival as a coin tossed endlessly. Heads, we survive. Tails, we vanish. How many times can the coin fall in our favor before chance demands its due? 1,000 coin tosses, 1,000,000. Each disaster was a flip. Each famine, each predator's attack, each eruption, each ice age a roll that could have ended the story. By any measure, the odds should have broken against us long ago. And yet, improbably, they did not. Take the genetic bottlenecks as evidence. DNA tells us that at multiple points, our species was reduced to only a few thousand individuals. That is not survival. That is statistical noise, a margin so narrow it borders on extinction. From so few, all modern humanity descends. Imagine the chance required for those few to survive. Famine, disease, predators, and climate shifts long enough to repopulate the earth. It should not have happened, but it did. Or consider Toba. The eruption blotted out the sun, starved ecosystems, and nearly ended us. If the ash had lingered longer, if the famine had deepened, if a disease had struck at the same time, humanity would have been erased. The chance alignment of survivable refuges, stable food sources, and cultural resilience was almost absurdly unlikely. Yet it occurred. Predators, too, tested the odds. For millions of years, humans were among the weakest creatures on the landscape. We lacked claws, fangs, armor. By all probability, we should have been erased by saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, or cave lions. And yet, by fire, by strategy, by sheer accident, we endured long enough to become hunters ourselves. Ice ages rolled across the planet, each one a reset button for ecosystems. Entire species vanished beneath the cold. Yet humanity endured, surviving in refuges where chance aligned food, shelter, and cooperation. Most species do not survive repeated climate swings of that magnitude. By the mathematics of extinction, we should not have either. Speculatively, when you weigh these countless odds, the predator's missed strike, the drought that broke just in time, the ember that stayed lit through the storm, it seems less like inevitability and more like an impossible run of fortune. Humanity's existence is a gambler's streak, a sequence of near losses that somehow never landed on final silence. This raises a haunting question. If existence itself is improbable, what does that mean for us now? Do we see ourselves as chosen, as destiny made flesh, or do we recognize that we are fragile accidents, here only because chance allowed it? The truth may be that we are both creatures forged by disaster, yet carried by luck. Consider the billions who did not survive. Entire lineages ended in obscurity. Entire cultures vanished without trace. For every ancestor who passed on life, countless others fell erased by famine, predators, disease, or chance. Humanity as a whole survived, but survival was never universal. It was always selective, always a narrowing of possibility. Our existence today is built on the silence of those who did not endure. Speculatively, if we had to calculate the odds of one species surviving 2 million years of catastrophe, the numbers would shrink toward zero. Perhaps it is only because we look backward that it feels inevitable. From within the story, from each narrow escape, there was never certainty, only the razor's edge, only chance. Picture a child 70 years ago, born into famine after the Toba eruption. The sky is dark, the land barren. Her tribe huddles by a lake, eating scraps of fish, roots, insects. She survives barely long enough to have children of her own. Against all odds, her lineage continues. Thousands of generations later, one of her descendants is you. If she had not endured, if hunger had taken her before she grew, you would never have drawn breath. That is the scale of improbability. That is the fragility of existence. So when we say humanity should not exist, we are not speaking in metaphor. We are stating the mathematics of survival. By every calculation, by every measure, the odds were too long. We are here not because we were destined, but because chance, improbably, fell in our favor again and again. And yet, this improbable survival shaped us. Knowing hunger, we learned to share. Facing predators, we learned to fight together. Confronted with disaster, we learned to imagine. Every improbable survival became the forge of traits that carried us forward. Our fragility was our teacher. Our improbability was our strength. But if our survival was luck, then what does that say about our future? If existence is improbable, how long can such fortune hold? To explore that question, we must turn from chance itself to the fragility of civilization, the thin shell that separates us from the ancient trials our ancestors knew so well. Civilization feels solid. Cities rise like mountains of stone and steel. Roads stretch across continents. Satellites orbit the planet. It is easy to believe that humanity has conquered its vulnerabilities, that we have left the precariousness of survival behind. But our dominance is recent, so recent it barely registers against the scale of prehistory. For more than 2 million years, we were not masters of the world but its subjects, shaped by famine, predators, ice, and fire. Only in the last 10,000 years did civilization emerge, and even then, it was born fragile, trembling on the bones of near extinction. Imagine standing at the dawn of agriculture 10,000 years ago. Small bands of humans begin to plant seeds in the earth, to tether animals, to settle in villages. It is a radical transformation, but it does not erase the dangers of the past. A single bad harvest still means hunger. A single drought still means death. Diseases spread easily through crowded settlements. Famine and plague haunted the first cities as surely as predators haunted the caves of our ancestors. Civilization was not a wall against extinction. It was a thin veneer stretched over the same vulnerabilities we had always known. Archaeological evidence confirms this fragility. The earliest farming communities often collapsed under the strain of soil exhaustion or climate shifts. Entire regions were abandoned when crops failed, when rivers dried, when the rains no longer came. The story of humanity after agriculture is not one of uninterrupted progress, but of repeated collapses. Civilizations rose, only to fall back into hunger and ruin. Speculatively, one might say that our empires rest on ruins, stacked upon ruins, each one a reminder that dominance is never permanent. From Sumer to the Maya, from the Indus Valley to Easter Island, the pattern repeats: prosperity, expansion, collapse. Each collapse was not the end of humanity, but each was a reminder of how thin the line remains. And even now, the shell of civilization is thinner than it seems. Modern abundance, with its supermarkets and supply chains, is not freedom from scarcity, but a system balanced on delicate threads. A disruption in climate, in energy, in soil could unravel it. The echoes of our ancient fragility remain beneath the surface, waiting for the right conditions to resurface. Consider this: just 10,000 years ago, a blink in geological time, we were still hunter-gatherers entirely at the mercy of nature. The shift to agriculture, the rise of cities, the growth of states, these are so new that they represent less than 1% of the human story. For the other 99%, we were vulnerable, scattered, fragile. That long history has not vanished. It is still inside us, a memory written into instinct and fear. Speculatively, perhaps this is why we remain obsessed with apocalyptic visions, flood myths, fire myths, stories of wrath and collapse. Civilization has not erased our awareness of fragility. It has only masked it. Beneath our towers and machines, we remain the same beings who once crouched in caves, whispering against the dark. Think of how recent our dominance truly island. The pyramids of Egypt are only 500 years old. Rome's empire lasted less than 1,000 years. The Industrial Revolution, which transformed the world, began just 250 years ago. Even the idea of global civilization, humanity linked by trade, communication and technology, is scarcely a century old. Against 2 million years of survival on the brink, this is nothing. Civilization is a flicker, a fragile experiment still untested by the full fury of nature. And what of the foundations on which this experiment rests? Agriculture itself is vulnerable. Crops depend on stable seasons, on rivers that flow, on soils that replenish. Climate shifts, like those that once drove our ancestors into famine, still hold power over us. Water tables drop, forests vanish, ice melts. Civilization stands not apart from nature, but upon it, as precarious as a fire carried in bark through the storm. Speculatively, one might imagine future historians, if any exist, looking back on our age as just another collapse. They might see our skyscrapers as ruins buried in sand, our satellites as silent husks orbiting above a quiet Earth. They would not see inevitability in our story. They would see fragility stretched too far. Yet fragility does not erase resilience. Just as our ancestors endured predators, famine, and ice, so too does humanity today carry the instincts of survival. The difference is that our trials now come not only from nature, but from ourselves. Technology multiplies our power but also magnifies our risks. Civilization is fragile because we are fragile. The shell we built is only as strong as our ability to adapt, to cooperate, to remember the narrow escapes that defined us. And so, when we look at our empires, our machines, our abundance, we must remember what lies beneath. Civilization is not triumph. It is a thin pause in the long battle against extinction, a pause resting on bones, on ash, on near vanishings. 10,000 years ago, we were still prey. That memory is not gone. It waits beneath our streets and fields, whispering of how easily it could all unravel. To see why this fragility endures, we must look not only at civilization's rise, but at its memory, the deep myths and fears that still echo through us, born from the ages when the world seemed intent on erasing us. Even after the rise of cities, the memory of survival did not vanish. It lingered, carried forward not in bones or tools, but in stories. Across the world, civilizations preserved echoes of ancient catastrophes, floods, fires, darkness, wrathful skies. Myths that at first glance seem symbolic may in fact be the oldest memories of humanity. Whispers of near extinctions carried across generations, reshaped into legend but rooted in truth. Consider the flood myths. From Mesopotamia to India, from China to the Americas, cultures told of waters rising to consume the world, leaving only a handful of survivors. Why such universal imagery? Perhaps because floods were real and devastating. Rivers swelled, storms destroyed settlements, seas rose after ice retreated. But at a deeper level, these stories may be echoes of prehistoric cataclysms, glacial melts that drowned coastlines, rains that followed droughts, floods so vast they reshaped human memory. For people who lived always on the edge, the fear of being swallowed by water was not metaphor, it was history. Then there are myths of fire. Cultures speak of skies burning, mountains erupting, flames consuming the land. The eruption of Toba 74, 0 years ago may survive as a shadow in such tales, a memory of ash-darkened skies, of famine and cold disguised as stories of divine wrath. Even later eruptions, smaller but still devastating, would have etched themselves into memory. Fire from the earth was not myth, it was experience, passed down in whispers, reshaped into warnings cloaked as religion. And myths of darkness, of suns swallowed, of nights that lasted too long may be rooted in volcanic winters or ice ages. Imagine the terror of seeing the sun dimmed for years after an eruption, the world colder, harvests failing. For those who lived through it, the memory would burn into the collective psyche. To tell stories of darkness was to remember, to warn, to prepare for when it might come again. Speculatively, these myths were not inventions of imagination alone. They were memory systems. In a world without writing, story was the archive of survival. A flood myth was not only a tale but a reminder. Beware the river's wrath. Climb when the waters rise. A fire myth was a warning. Mountains can erupt, skies can darken, prepare for famine. Darkness myths cautioned, do not trust the sun will always shine. Each story encoded lessons, keeping alive the memory of catastrophes long after direct witnesses were gone. Our collective fears today may still carry these echoes. The modern obsession with apocalypse in books, films, dreams may not be new invention, but old memory resurfacing. We fear collapse because collapse shaped us. We dream of floods and fire because floods and fire nearly ended us. Survival against annihilation is not just history, it is inheritance. Archaeologists and anthropologists point to how resilient memory can be. Oral traditions have carried accurate descriptions of volcanic eruptions and floods across thousands of years. Some Aboriginal Australian stories describe coastlines now drowned for millennia, showing that myths can preserve real events across immense spans of time. If memory can endure that long, perhaps our oldest myths truly are the voices of ancestors who lived through catastrophes that nearly erased humanity. Speculatively, one could imagine a tribe gathered around a fire 50 years ago, telling children the story of a great darkness when the sun failed and food vanished. The story becomes ritual, then legend, then myth, but its kernel remains. Remember the danger. Thousands of generations later, we inherit the tale not as literal memory, but as a primal fear of apocalypse encoded into culture. This may explain why myths of annihilation are so universal. They are not random invention. They are the shared inheritance of a species forged in disaster. Floods, fire, famine, darkness. These are not only symbols, they are memories that shaped how we think, how we fear, how we prepare. Civilization may appear solid, but beneath it runs this current of memory. We feel it in our fascination with doomsday predictions, in our stories of endings, in our instinctive anxiety when the world shows signs of instability. These are not irrational fears, they are echoes of survival strategies. To anticipate catastrophe is to do what our ancestors did: remember, prepare, endure. And so, the ancient memory of fear is not weakness, it is strength. It is the reason we watch the skies, track the weather, store food, and imagine futures. Fear kept us alive when strength alone would have failed. Fear, carried through myth, was our first warning system. But memory alone did not save us. Survival demanded more than stories. It demanded choices, sacrifices, strategies shaped by catastrophe. To see this more clearly, we must imagine not only what we remembered, but what might have happened had we failed, what the world would look like if, at any of those moments, humanity had finally fallen silent. What if the story had ended? What if, at any of those razor-thin moments, the dice had rolled differently and the last ember of humanity had gone out? The earth would not have wept, the forests would have grown, the rivers would have flowed, the predators would have hunted. Life would have continued without us. The silence of our absence would have been filled by others. Speculatively, the throne we now occupy might have belonged to Neanderthals. They were strong, resilient, and adapted to Ice Age Europe with a mastery of survival honed over hundreds of thousands of years. Imagine a world where Neanderthals endured, and we did not. Their broad-browed faces would be the human face of Earth. Their languages unknown to us would echo in cities carved from stone. Their myths, not ours, would dominate. History books, if they wrote them, would tell of Neanderthal triumph, not human resilience. Denisovans, too, might have taken our place. Though little is known of them beyond fragments of bone and the whispers of their DNA, they spanned vast territories in Asia. Perhaps they would have built civilizations across the steppes and mountains, their adaptations shaping a culture we cannot imagine. In Tibet today, people still carry Denisovan genes that allow them to thrive at high altitudes. Had Denisovans endured, perhaps entire empires would have risen on the roof of the world, sustained by lungs designed for thin air. Or perhaps Homo erectus would have continued its reign. For nearly 2 million years, they endured far longer than we have so far. Sturdy, persistent, adaptable, they may have carried fire across continents long after our fragile line faltered. Imagine a world where Homo erectus evolved further, their tools refined, their societies expanded. They might have built their own version of civilization, one less defined by imagination, more by endurance. The earth might have been theirs, and ours, the forgotten branch, and if not other humans, then predators. Saber-toothed cats once ruled the plains, their fangs longer than a man's hand. Giant hyenas prowled in packs, strong enough to tear apart bone. Cave lions, larger than modern lions, claimed Europe's caves before we did. If humanity had vanished, these predators might have reigned unchecked. Without us to hunt them, without us to drive them back with fire, perhaps they would have endured longer, shaping ecosystems in ways now lost. The world might have been one of tooth and claw, where intelligence never rose high enough to tame flame or write memory. Speculatively, even other creatures could have risen. Ravens and crows, with their cunning problem-solving, elephants, with their memory and social bonds, dolphins, with their complex communication. Given millions of years, perhaps one of these would have filled the niche of intelligence we now occupy. Perhaps the Earth was never destined for us at all. Perhaps we are only placeholders, an unlikely accident, sitting in a seat that could just as easily have gone to another. Picture walking through a city not of humans, but of Neanderthals. The streets are wide, the buildings massive, designed for stronger bodies. Fires burn in hearths, voices echo in languages we cannot imagine. Or picture a world where no humans walk at all, only predators ruling the savannas, forests regrown over what might have been fields, rivers untouched by dams, skies free of smoke. The Earth does not require us. It never did. This reflection humbles. Our dominance feels permanent, but it is only the latest outcome of chance. Had we fallen, the Earth would still have thrived, perhaps even more richly. Forests would have expanded, animals multiplied, seas remained untouched by nets. Our absence would not have been tragedy to the planet. It would have been silence, quickly filled by others. And yet, we did not fall. Somehow, impossibly, we endured while others vanished. But to imagine the world without us is to remember the truth. Survival was never guaranteed. Our throne is borrowed, fragile, and could have been claimed by others at any moment. The question, then, is not only what would have happened if we had fallen, but what became of us because we did not. What did endless trial and disaster shape us into? To explore this, we must turn not to absence, but to transformation, how struggle forged the very essence of what we are. What if extinction had never circled us? What if predators had not stalked our ancestors? If famine had not hollowed bellies? If eruptions had not blackened skies? If ice had not descended across continents? What if we had lived in abundance, unchallenged, safe? Would we still have become what we are? Or did the very pressure of disaster forge our genius, shaping us into the improbable creatures who now stand astride the Earth? Speculatively, without struggle, humanity might never have developed imagination. Hunger forced us to think beyond the present moment, how to store food, how to track seasons, how to plan hunts. Cold forced us to envision clothing, shelter, fire. Predators forced us to invent weapons, strategies, cooperation. Each catastrophe demanded foresight, and foresight demanded imagination. Remove disaster, and perhaps imagination never grows sharp enough to cut into the future. Consider language. It was not born in times of comfort, but in moments of necessity. To coordinate a hunt, to warn of danger, to share memory of where water once flowed, words became survival tools. Without the pressure of extinction, perhaps language would have remained simple cries and gestures. Complex speech may never have been needed. We might have remained creatures of instinct, clever but mute, bound to the present without the ability to plan or dream. Culture, too, was born from struggle. Around the fire, stories were not idle entertainment. They were repositories of survival knowledge, which plants could kill, which rivers flooded, which animals prowled at night. Myths and rituals carried memory forward when famine and death erased individuals. Without disaster pressing against us, perhaps culture would have remained thin, unnecessary, fragile. Our minds would not have been carved by memory, our spirits not bound by story. Speculatively, even morality may have been shaped by trial. Cooperation was not kindness, it was survival. In scarcity, selfish groups vanished, while cooperative groups endured. From that pressure came empathy, fairness, loyalty, traits that defined human societies. Without scarcity, without extinction, pressing always at the edges, perhaps we would never have evolved the moral instincts that bind us together today. And what of technology? Each invention was a response to pressure. Spears against predators, needles against the cold, nets and hooks against famine. fire against the night. Tools did not appear in abundance. They appeared in desperation. Without disaster forcing innovation, perhaps humanity would have remained with simple stones, never moving beyond the most basic survival. Picture a world without struggle. Early humans live in lands of endless fruit, gentle climates, few predators. They need no fire, no tools, no weapons. They live as other animals do, sustained but stagnant. But they are not us. Without struggle, they do not develop cities, science, art, or memory. They do not walk on the moon or split the atom. They do not imagine futures. They remain in the present, untested, unshaped. This reflection is unsettling. It suggests that what we cherish most, our art, our language, our morality, our imagination, was born not of peace, but of catastrophe. Our genius was forged in disaster. We are the children of famine and fire, of predators and ice. Without extinction's pressure, we might never have been forced to become what we are. And yet, this realization also carries weight. If our greatness is born of struggle, then fragility remains its foundation. Take away the disasters, and we might not exist, but give us too many, and we vanish. We walk always on the knife's edge, where too little pressure brings stagnation, and too much brings extinction. Speculatively, perhaps this is why humanity remains restless even in abundance. We invent challenges when none threaten us. We create wars, competitions, puzzles, frontiers. Something in us, shaped by millions of years of struggle, cannot live without it. Comfort feels unnatural. Pressure feels like home. We need trial, because trial made us. Picture a modern city at night, lights glowing, towers rising, abundance everywhere. Yet beneath the glass and steel, the old instincts stir. We still fear collapse, still tell stories of floods and fire, still prepare for endings. We thrive in peace, but we remember the forge of catastrophe. We remember that without it, we would never have become. And so, to ask what if we had never struggled is to ask what if we had never been. Struggle shaped not only our survival, but our very identity. Our genius was not destiny. It was adaptation to disaster, sharpened by necessity, preserved by memory. This is why we cannot separate our brilliance from our fragility. They are the same thing. We are intelligent because we were weak. We are imaginative because we were endangered. We are cooperative because we were vulnerable. Our triumphs are carved from our scars. But this reflection leads us deeper still to the recognition that survival, no matter how adaptive, was never certain. Each trial could have ended us. Each adaptation was only enough for one more narrow escape. And as we look back, we must see clearly. Survival was not only struggle, not only genius. It was also chance that rolled in our favor, just enough to keep the ember of humanity alive. For all our ingenuity, for all our adaptability, survival has never been ours to command. Chance has always played its hand, rolling dice against us, sparing us sometimes, nearly erasing us at others. To look honestly at our history is to admit that we are not solely the architects of our survival, we are also its lucky inheritors. Consider the meteors. The Earth has been struck before, catastrophically. 65 million years ago, a rock from space ended the age of the dinosaurs, reshaping the planet in fire and ash. Had another such rock fallen within the last 2 million years, striking where early humans clustered, our story would have ended before it began. The sky has not been empty. Near misses are etched into the geological record, impacts in distant regions that did not happen to coincide with our fragile populations. A small difference in orbit, a few thousand years variation, and there would be no us. Disease, too, was chance. Epidemics ravaged human groups long before recorded history. In small bands, One virulent pathogen could wipe out everyone, yet by chance, diseases often burned themselves out before reaching all survivors. Or immunity spread by luck of genetics, carried by individuals who happened to endure. We are here not because disease spared humanity, but because it failed, again and again, to completely erase us. Speculatively, entire lineages may have been lost to pathogens we will never know. A fever that swept through a small valley could have erased an entire band. 1,000 possible futures vanishing in a single season. Yet others, by chance, did not encounter the pathogen, or encountered it, and survived. Our lineage is a roll of microbial dice, spared not by strength, but by probability. Then there were predators. A single encounter could determine everything. Imagine a night on the savannah 1.5 million years ago. A family of Homo erectus sleeps near a dying fire. A saber-toothed cat prowls. If the fire dies completely, the cat strikes. The family vanishes, and their lineage with them. If the ember holds a little longer, the flame rises, and the predator retreats. One ember, one flicker of chance, decides whether their descendants walk the earth or vanish into silence. Climate, too, rolled against us. Ice advanced, deserts spread, rains failed. Sometimes the shift was too sudden, too sharp, and groups perished. But sometimes, by chance of geography, others endured. A valley caught just enough rainfall. A river lasted one more generation. A cave opened at just the right place to shelter a small band. Geography is luck, and luck preserved us. Even encounters with other humans were chance. When Homo sapiens met Neanderthals or Denisovans, sometimes there was violence, sometimes there was interbreeding. The outcomes were unpredictable. A single battle lost, a single territory ceded, could have altered the balance forever. That Homo sapiens survived while the others fell is not only a story of adaptation, it is also a story of coincidence, our migrations overlapping with theirs at times and places where fortune tipped toward us. Speculatively, one could imagine an alternate prehistory where Neanderthals, by chance, endured longer, found refuge in the right regions, expanded instead of declining. In that story, we might be the ghosts, remembered only in fragments of DNA within them. Survival was not destiny. It was chance alignment of circumstance, opportunity, and probability. And yet, from these roles of chance, humanity emerged. Our survival is improbable not because disaster was rare, but because disaster was constant, and chance spared us just enough times to keep the thread unbroken. Think of the mathematics. Each generation carried risks: predators, famine, disease, drought, eruption, conflict. At any point, the chain could have snapped. That it never did, across millions of years, feels less like inevitability and more like an impossible run of fortune. We are, in this sense, gamblers who have survived 1,000 losing games by winning just enough to continue. This recognition reshapes how we view ourselves. It humbles the story of progress, reminding us that behind every innovation, every adaptation, lies the deeper truth. Without luck, none of it would matter. Fire, tools, language, none could save us from a rock falling from the sky, or a drought that lasted too long, or a predator striking at the wrong moment. Chance is the silent partner of survival. Speculatively, perhaps this is why humans developed rituals, prayers, offerings to gods. We sensed, even before science, that survival was not fully in our control. We tried to bargain with chance, to plead with the sky, to align ourselves with forces beyond us. Myths of fortune and fate may be echoes of this truth, that survival felt like a roll of dice, and we sought meaning in the randomness. But chance is double-edged. It saved us, yes, but it could as easily have erased us. Our survival is proof not of inevitability, but of fragility, and that fragility has never gone away. We remain, even now, vulnerable to the same forces: disease, climate, impact, chance itself. Civilization may mask this, but beneath it, the dice are still rolling. To see this more clearly, we must step from chance into fragility itself, not just of prehistory, but of now. For though our survival has been improbable, it has also been precarious, balanced always on the same edge our ancestors knew too well. Humanity's story is not one of triumph. It is not the tale of a species destined to rise, inevitable in its mastery, secure in its place. It is the story of survival against impossible odds, of near erasures, of narrow escapes, of chance aligning again and again to spare us just long enough to continue. Every breath we take is borrowed from ancestors who should not have lived, from lineages that slipped through when the dice should have fallen against them. We like to imagine ourselves as chosen, as victors of nature's endless war, but the truth is less comforting. We are survivors, not rulers. We walk today not because we were strongest, but because we were lucky, lucky in predators missed, lucky in rivers that still flowed, lucky in diseases that failed to kill us all, lucky in meteors that passed us by. At every step, extinction circled close, and at every step we staggered forward anyway. So the question remains, and it may never leave us: did we endure because we were meant to, or because chance rolled in our favor? Was our survival destiny written in the marrow of our bones, or was it nothing more than an improbable streak of luck, a gambler's fortune stretched too far? Perhaps the answer is both. Perhaps disaster forged our resilience, while chance gave us the space to use it. Perhaps our genius was born in struggle, but our existence was preserved by the accident of fortune. We are, at once, the children of disaster and the wards of chance. And yet, the haunting truth lingers. It could have been otherwise. At any point, the story could have ended. And if it had, there would be no cities, no art, no memory, no future, just silence, as the earth continued without us. So let us close not with triumph, but with humility. Picture a lone tribe huddled by fire under a sky black with ash. Their world is ending. The air is cold, the ground barren, the night unrelenting. They do not know if they will survive until morning. They do not know that inside their fragile circle burns a spark, the spark of 7 billion lives yet to come. They do not know they are carrying us. And perhaps that is the lesson. Our existence was never guaranteed. It was, and always will be, the most improbable fire of all.